Welcome, everybody. I'm Selena Rezvani, and you're joining Women and Work Culture. This is a live stream all about those positive habits and practices for making your workplace more inclusive to women, because your business depends on it. I am so excited to be here today with the expert of experts on innovation. My dear friend, Dr. Simone Ahuja is here. Hi, Simone.
Hi, Selena. So good to be here with you.
Same. I'm always so happy to see your face. And a big hello to our community who's joining us today. Drop us a note and tell us where in the world you're joining from. I already see Marcheri from Clay, New York, Anissa from Tampa Bay, and Michelle Wong saying hi this afternoon. Simone, I'm so excited to get to tell people a little bit about you and your really cool background. It's really only a sliver of what you've done. But Simone's the co-founder of Blood Orange, which is an innovation and strategy firm with its HQ in Minneapolis. She advises, get this, 3M, Procter & Gamble, Target, where so much of my paycheck goes, amazingly, and the World Economic Forum, to name a few. How fierce is that? Amazing client list. And I have to tell you, Simone and I met years ago when our book publisher, Wiley, introduced us. We had books coming out at exactly the same time. And I'm so grateful to them for matchmaking us, because it was really friendship at first sight, at least for me, Simone.
Same.
Simone is the co-author of an international bestseller, You Got Innovation. And today we're going to get to talk about her newest book, which is called Disrupt It Yourself. All about ways to power, intrapreneurs, right? To those passionate individuals who want to innovate inside companies, who want to push the cutting edge. So very excited to hear from you. As we go, friends, please send us your questions for Simone. We have some of our own, but we're going to try to get to yours as they relate to disrupting it yourself. And hi, by the way, Samantha in Boston, Pamela in Round Rock, Michelle in Dallas. So happy to see you all. So let's get right in, Simone. Your book is all about being intrapreneurial, right? A playful term.
Yeah.
I love. Your book's called Disrupt It Yourself. Will you tell us a little bit about what you mean by those words?
Sure. Absolutely. And hi, everyone. Good to see everybody chatting in. Keep it going. We're looking forward to talking with you along the way here. So intrapreneurship, as you could imagine, is a lot like entrepreneurship, but it happens on the inside of large organizations. So might be a more formal organization. It could be a publicly held company. It could be a not-for-profit, but the idea is it's typically in an established institution. So the idea is you're not an entrepreneur kind of hacking ideas in your garage. You're really functioning more like an entrepreneur inside of the big organization. And the book Disrupt It Yourself really was the genesis of a few things. My first book that you mentioned, You Got Innovation, was all about frugal innovation and getting really connected to your end users. We'll talk a lot about that today. And how do you have better ideas so you can serve a huge host of end users? So maybe not just high-end customers with high margin products and services, but how are you more inclusive in your problem-solving process? And what I saw over the last several years is that process of ideation was getting better. People were understanding what it means to be divergent through processes like design thinking. But what I also saw is that it's sometimes really hard to move those ideas through big organizations. Mm-hmm. And for those of you who are a part of big organizations, we're going to share some strategies and tactics to help you do that today. For those of you who are more independent, we're going to share some strategies and tactics that are relevant to you as well. But that was the genesis of Disrupt Yourself, was thinking about, well, how do we take those big ideas and move them through, get them through to execution? Because ideas are great, but really show me the money means Show me the execution, right? And I mean that in show me the money in like a metaphorical and a realistic way. It's sort of like, how do I generate value for the end users that I serve so that I can keep going?
Yeah. I think you're one of the first to really talk about don't just cater to your blue chip VIP clients and customers, like really think about the experience of the others. So I love that you're including and thinking that way at multiple levels. And I love your point too around entrepreneurship. It's kind of the ultimate, isn't it? As entrepreneurs, we can sometimes be an island out there on our own. And there's kind of a beauty, isn't there, to having the budgets, the brand,
Yeah.
right? Some of these fallbacks to kind of to back you up and strengthen, you know, your innovative idea.
That's exactly right. And what I'll share is that today, when we're facing crises of COVID, a crises of racial, crisis of racial equity as well, and a lot of people are thinking, well, what's my role in this? How do I solve problems? These principles really can help you navigate those. I mean, we talk a lot about inclusivity, both in not only who are we solving problems for, but who's solving the problems. And that's each of you. Everybody who's watching here today, it's each of you. All of you have the potential to take your idea based on something that you've observed as a pain point and move it forward. So that's when we think about today, I think the call for inclusivity is more than ever. And I guess, in all of the challenges that are happening, the good news is there seems to be more openness and more interest in being inclusive. So these strategies will be even more impactful now than before.
I love it. I love it. But it kind of requires us to look beyond the obvious a little bit, or look beyond the way it's always been done.
Exactly.
So I want to help make it like super concrete for people, if in case anyone's saying, what does this look like? Can you give us an example of a self-led kind of disruption?
Sure. I'll give you an example in a large organization. An intrapreneur named Belanda Addis. So Belanda Addis is an organic chemist who still works at L'Oreal, and she's Haitian American. And I bring that up because she was working on mascara formulation there, but she always was concerned and disturbed by the fact that the company that she worked for and was happy to work for was making foundation that didn't match her deeper skin tone. And she was quite frustrated by this. And what I really love about Belanda is that she didn't sit back and she didn't wait for a top-down mandate. She went to her leadership and said, you know what? These products that we have that are supposed to serve people of color all over the world are really not cutting it. And you're supposed to be a leader in this category. And, to their credit, they said, show us what you got. Now, to an extent, I think what was really there's so many things that make sense about her situation. So what they did do is, instead of giving her a ton of resources, they didn't give her a big budget, they didn't give her a big team, they did give her lab space and some latitude. And that's a part of, what I think is the new management paradigm for the 21st century. If the old management paradigm was how do we keep people on the rails, the new management paradigm is how do we create space for people. So they created some space for her to experiment and test. And while she didn't have a big team, she leveraged, I think, one of the most important behaviors of an entrepreneur, and that is to enlist other people into her process. So not, hey, this is important to me, can you help me? But here's why this is important to everybody that we serve and why this might be important to you as well. And in fact, some of the people that she worked with had also experienced this problem, since they were teenagers or young adults that were saying, look, this product, this foundation, it looks chalky on me. It doesn't make sense. It's not right. And so what she did was leverage whatever resources she had available to her, lab time, the folks that she enlisted to work with her. And then she kind of tagged on to road shows that L'Oreal was already a part of to get next to the end user, to talk to them, to test on them, to understand what their needs are. Is this working? Is this not working? And ultimately, and I don't want to make it sound too easy like it was magic. It took a lot of tenacity and resilience and, sticking to it. And again, they had a ton of knowledge between them and passion around this. They emerged with a blockbuster product that was one of the best sellers ever for L'Oreal. So there are a few things at play here. One is this idea of, am I waiting for permission? Right? Or am I waiting for a top-down mandate, or do I spot a problem because I either have experienced it myself or I observed others experiencing it.
Mhm.
And then the other thing is, using the resources that you have at hand, right? Whatever is available to me. And that doesn't include just financial resources and other resources like space. It also includes knowledge. Who is in your knowledge ecosystem, and how do I bring them in here? Because that, I think, is one of the most underutilized resources when we think about solving problems. People think we have to do it all ourselves, and that's almost never true. There's this expression called the hipster, the hacker, and the hustler. Right. And the hipster is the person that often has the big idea, and the hacker might be the person with the business know-how, and the hustler is the person who can socialize or evangelize the idea and keep kind of the energy going around it. And it's not very often found in one person. The days of the lone entrepreneur hacking away in their garage are kind of gone. And now we see these ecosystems being built. So they could be kind of microsystems like Belanda and her small team in this case, or they could be, in other scenarios or other case studies, that I've researched, it's people all around the world. So the beauty of this was they kept it frugal. It was kind of permissionless in that they weren't waiting for a top-down mandate, and they got into action. That's key.
You got so many likes and loves telling Belanda's story, and I'm so inspired hearing that. One of the issues we talk about sometimes on this show is, counting up all the things you're not, or what you don't have knowledge-wise or experience-wise, rather than, focusing on how you could get that other places and how important it is to seek it out from other places. So I love your comment. It's not found in one person. Ask yourself, who could I tap, right? Who could I leverage? Who does know a little more about this than me? It doesn't all have to be you.
It doesn't all have to be you, and it takes the pressure off. And I just want to address Anissa's question about pitching. How do I do this? What if I have an idea, but I'm not confident pitching? I would say one of the biggest things is, again, tap into your network. There are a lot of simple pitching frameworks that are out there that can help you organize your thoughts. And I think one of the most important things to think about is, who can help you with that? Can you practice? Simple as, can you practice in front of them? But then, what is the data? What is the small data you can gather even before you give your pitch? One of the probably, I would say, it's not a mistake per se, but it's not maybe the most effective strategies. People will go into leadership and say, I've got this idea. And leadership may or may not respond to that. But when you have something that you've observed, that you've pulled some data around it, like I didn't ask anyone. I went and talked to these 10 people, here's what they told me. You kind of synthesize it into, here are the key themes, and then even some real quotes from the user. So it's not your words, it's their words. Then you start to have something that makes the pitch more compelling, right? So Anissa, I would say, leverage simple things like pitch frameworks, go to your network, ask them to help you refine your message and to practice, and then go into your pitch with some early data.
I love that, because every time I've seen and interviewed a woman executive who gathered data, she said, guess what? I became the world's expert on that data. I then became the person with that unique overlap of data points, and people seek you out after that for it.
That's exactly right.
What a smart
actually,
way.
I'll add to that, Selena, because if we think about what is intrapreneurship and what is the at the core of disrupt it yourself innovation, it's empathy and not making assumptions, right? So very often what we find, I was talking with a group yesterday that was saying, we just, as their entire model has changed from in-person to digital, they were saying, we just realized we are building solutions for ourselves. And it was a pretty homogeneous group of people. And they said, we realized that we are making a ton of assumptions about our end users, and the way that we were trying to help them solve problems doesn't really serve them. So once you go in without the assumptions and you go in with the data, I think it does really give you an edge, and it does really make you a bit of an expert, because while it sounds so basic that of course you'll talk to your end users and they can't always articulate what their needs are, but you can observe sometimes what are their pain points. You can start to pull it together as you start talking to and walking in their shoes a little bit. It does. It makes you the expert. It puts you in the forefront, and it gives you some good grounding to stand on if you're making a case for why something should move forward.
I love it. And it seems like it requires, Simone, some humility to not assume, right? Sometimes we have this picture of leadership in our head that's got a lot of bluster.
Yeah.
And, I've got all the answers and I'm so the expert, pressure to be that person. And so I love your reminder to not make assumptions, be more the blank slate.
Well, here's what I think is really interesting. And as I was thinking about you, and I've watched your LinkedIn lives before and really enjoyed them, and I especially appreciate the focus on women. And if we think about what it is that women can bring, there are a couple of things, and I think one of those is empathy and more listening. If there's one thing that often gets missed in solving problems for our end users, and by end users I mean it could be a paying customer, it could be anyone that touches the product or the service or the business model that you're trying to put forward. We make a ton of assumptions before them. And I have observed, and we do have data around, the fact that women, they exhibit more empathy. And if you exhibit more empathy and you come forward with that humility, right? The humility that I don't know everything. In fact, I probably know very little about this unless you've experienced it yourself, which is why sometimes some of the best innovations are things that people, an innovator has experienced themselves. But if you haven't, go out and find out what's really going on. I'll give you a really quick example. One of my clients is Stanley Black & Decker, and we were doing some early work a few years ago in emerging markets. They were, the markets are expanding. They wanted to understand how to better access the users. And this is a very smart and savvy company that does very well in innovation in many areas, particularly in the US. But like a lot of companies, as they were branching out into emerging markets, they made an assumption that end users really wanted cheaper products. Mm-hmm. And we said, well, how do we know that? Is that really true? And we went there and we did some ethnographic research. So that's kind of like the anthropologist's approach, right? You walk in their shoes, you go to their homes, you understand what their aspirations. And what we found is that the people that we were talking to, these were electricians, plumbers, carpenters, we found out that they did want high value products, but they also wanted access to affordable finance. They wanted to understand how to grow their business. They wanted to understand how to educate themselves and the people around them so they could pass on the business to their kids. They wanted mobility. So there were a whole host of things that they wanted that we were making assumptions about originally till we went in and did this research. So that's where I think women especially can bring their empathy, bring their hearts forward. And it's funny because I think sometimes we struggle with this because it can be seen as too soft. It can feel like it's not tangible or it's not formidable enough to bring forward into a business environment. But actually, interestingly, businesses are starting to flip that now. And I think if you can bring forward that empathy and that heart, get rid of the assumptions with the data, then you have a win.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds hard to turn down and say no to. If you got the data, really, and you've stepped into somebody else's shoes, because we've seen this with women time and time again with products where they were not at the table. They were not at the design table. And guess what? Those products or services didn't work for women or for women's physicality, right? And they had to be retrofitted. How about designing it right the first time?
How about listening? And like you say, how about that humility? And I'm going to just address this other question from Anissa about when your company's having a bad quarter. Actually, the data shows that the companies that are innovating even times of crisis like this one by far outperform. I think it's about 30% over the long term organizations that shut down innovation. And I think what's really interesting is that the forward-looking companies, and you probably have to find the forward-looking leaders if it's not a company-wide ethos, they are understanding everything's kind of accelerated right now. Like if we think about problem solving, COVID, for example, has really accelerated. Everybody's aware that, we have really moved to digital, right? Where it was sort of well, do we need to meet digitally? Now it's like, well, do we really need to meet in person, right? So a lot of things that were sort of in the purview of organizations is becoming compressed and catalyzed. So I think it's an especially important time to bring those forward. And I'll share with you too, Anissa, how you can do it is, in addition to gathering that early data, is making small bets. I think one of the things that, as individuals or groups, we don't have to do a massive pilot with a rollout to 1,800 stores. It can be a tiny, tiny experiment. Companies like Intuit call it a unit of one. Test it out with that one end user who you think will benefit from this product, service, or business model. One. If your hypothesis is proven, great, keep going. If it's disproven, that's great too. You're learning, so capture the learning, adjust your hypothesis if needed, or stop working on it. But if it's moving in a direction where you're learning, keep going. Go to 5 end users, go to 10 end users, and it can be very, very tiny. So I think that's one of the principles too of Disrupt Yourself I would want to emphasize both to individuals outside of large organizations and intrapreneurs is, let's go from making big bets to tiny bets and little experiments where we take small action steps. And I always like to say, when we think about what are the action steps we can use to solve a specific problem, I always like to say that, a third grader should be able to understand what you're talking about. Maybe they can't execute on it, but they should be able to understand. And it should be something that you can look at your list and be like, I could do that right now. I could do that 15 minutes to find out if there are any subject matter experts here in my network right now, as opposed to, sometimes I'll get things like, well, my next step is to influence senior leadership. Well, that's pretty overwhelming, right? So you got to break these things down step by step so that even if there's a bad quarter, you can make a case for why it's a low risk.
This is great. So, because I think Anissa's question brings up an important point. There is somebody who's wondering, yeah, but if I put this exciting idea forward, this proposal forward, even if it has data, kind of what if it's ruinous to me? Could it like destroy my career? And I'm kind of curious about that question. Is this overcomable if you do the big idea, you implement it, and it's not wonderful?
If you get to that phase where you go to implementation and then it doesn't work. So so I was kind of joking with a journalist who was interviewing me about intrapreneurship, but he actually made it kind of a headline, and I called it Entrepreneur Protection Program. There needs to be these in organizations because, there is a risk. There is a risk when you get into innovation programs, especially because they can change around in organizations fairly rapidly. So I think it makes sense to to keep yourself kind of balanced. But the value of bringing these ideas forward, I think, outweighs the risk. And here's the thing. Most companies today are starting to finally understand that they have to become learning organizations. This is a part of that humility you were talking about earlier, Selena, because if you're always looking for a big win, you're never going to hit them all. And that's always true, whether or not it's a big innovative idea or not. If it's something super incremental, if you call, the cherry Coke is innovation because we made it a new flavor. Okay, that's something different. But if you're talking about something that's actually going to access a new market, and you can demonstrate, well, this didn't work, but we captured these learnings. Here's how we can share those learnings so that people who are going forward can actually benefit from them. And it increases what I call ROI, not return on investment, but return on intelligence. Because organizational intelligence really is the way forward. The risk in organizations, a lot of them, is you learn something, it didn't work, sweep it under the carpet. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to be attached to that. And that's a massive cultural hurdle to overcome. So what I would say is, if you're in a pretty risk-averse environment where learning isn't a currency, then I would say make sure you align yourself with others, and especially leadership who are willing to, maybe they're entrepreneurs themselves, or they really fully appreciate what you're talking about. They'll provide you with kind of some of the air cover that you need.
That's so great. I love the air cover. You need that shield.
You need that.
If you're going to do new things, if you're going to scramble the way it's always been done. As one of my mentors always says, you got to crack a few eggs to make an omelet. And
that's
it makes me think of this here. So for all of you joining and listening, I just want to recap something you said that stood out to me. The experience outweighs the risk. right? It's okay to go out on that branch knowing it might break because you're going to be able to right yourself on the way down. You're
Yeah.
going to either win or you're going to learn something.
And I think
There
you
is
can
no.
tee it up that way. You tee it up that way, like, this is an unknown. This is my hypothesis. Here's how I'm going to test it out. I'm going to capture the learnings and come back to you. And you can even, I think the other thing that people can do when they're thinking about what's next is create your own metrics, because your leaders won't know what those metrics should be. You're the one you actually can build your own mini metrics and your own little KPIs in your tiny experiment to demonstrate further expertise, to demonstrate further knowledge, and so that you have something clear to work towards. And that makes it more tangible for you as well as any leadership around you.
That's awesome. You have more power in this, in shaping it and carving out your niche than you think.
That's
right?
it. So that's it. So I think that empowerment piece, especially, I think for women, I think we know that Selena, you probably know this data better, but I remember reading stats about, well, if there's a job description and a male is, partially qualified, let's say 60%, he might apply for it. A woman might want to wait till she's 80, 90, almost close to 100% qualified before she might apply to that job. So I would encourage everyone, and especially all the women on this call, to take that power. And if you, find your posse, find your people. There are other entrepreneurs in the organization that want to solve problems like you do. And I find when you build that community too, it gives you a ton of energy.
That's awesome. That's such good advice. And I think non-obvious advice, right? Because you may think, oh, okay, this is a finance-oriented project. Let me talk to someone who's a finance SME, right? And
Yeah.
talk to them. But you're not necessarily thinking, let me go talk to the engineer who just did a org-wide innovation that made a difference. So that's such good advice. Don't just do the birds of a feather thing
Absolutely. For two reasons, right? So one is
Yeah.
for support, and then one is because they might have a totally different lens to help you solve your problem.
This is great. We've gotten so many good tidbits about how individuals can put their ideas forward and really kind of fortify their pitch. But I want to ask you a kind of last culture question. A lot of us can relate to having worked in a bureaucracy where there's lots of layers and levels and approvals and things like that needed. How do you create more of that permissionless culture that's not so command and control?
So there are a couple of ways to do this. This can happen top down, and that's a pretty powerful way. We've seen some of this in COVID. Like, I've seen that with some of my clients, where just given the speed with which things had to happen, they had to collapse governance matrices, for example, had to move forward, had to make the change. And now they're looking at those saying, well, wait a minute, it worked really well. Why do we have these 5 layers? So that's a really powerful way to do it. The other way is to get into action. So even if it's not in your title, even if somebody didn't ask you to do it, there's a specific problem. You have to start getting into action and take that permission yourself. And I do think it's, once you get past, some early research, it's really powerful and valuable to align yourself with other entrepreneurs, as well as especially one leader, manager, someone who can give you the guidance and then the air cover that you need so you can move forward. So that's how you can, so there's the top-down approach. That's not always possible, but that doesn't mean you can't do it bottom up. It doesn't mean you can't take permission yourself.
I love that. It's find your kind of celebrity endorsement within the organization.
Exactly.
Say this is a really great idea,
Yeah.
or this is going to make a difference for us, or this is the right person to do it. I love it. One more thing, Simone, what's next for entrepreneurship? What's around the corner?
So I would say that entrepreneurship is the way forward. So we know that only 14% of new grads want to work in large organizations, and they'd rather start something on their own. They'd rather work in a startup. So for so many reasons, large organizations are going to become more entrepreneurial. They simply have to, so they can become more flexible. If one of the most important takeaways for individuals and organizations as we go forward in the next century is flexibility. You got to have mental flexibility. You got to have organizational flexibility. So I think that is a really critical for organizations. And it's a way to engage. The entrepreneurs I know talk to other people and say, hey, we actually have this kind of latitude here. So they draw other entrepreneurs towards them. And when you have, I think we all know that, research that says that when you have autonomy, when you have engagement, you have people that really care, it gives them extra rocket fuel to go forward. It gives you better problem solving for whoever it is that you're trying to serve, and it serves all the stakeholders.
Well, you're getting lots of hearts and love for that. If there are entrepreneur stories in your organization, share them, right? Don't sit on them. Don't
That's exactly
let them
right.
be the secret. Be somebody who's sharing them and making them open. So you're inspiring that wave of innovation. I want to thank you so much, Simone. This has been such a power half hour. It's really exciting to see the impact you're having in the engagement crisis. You're helping people be more engaged in organizations. You're helping leaders, unleash from their talent their full contributions, all their ideas and thinking. So thank you for all the stuff you're doing. And by the way, on a friend level, you're just as generous and encouraging as you are wicked smart. So
thanks,
thank
Selena.
you.
Thank
Keep
you.
sparkling. Keep sparkling. You all can learn about Simone's awesomeness through her book, Disrupt It Yourself. So well written and conversational. I encourage you to go get it. Her HBR articles and links, which you'll see in our show notes, and even her online courses, which are awesome. So check those out. I hope you'll also stay in touch with me. Check out my LinkedIn learning courses to power up your confidence to do things like make that big pitch. Sign up for my newsletter, which you'll see at the end, and follow me here on LinkedIn if you're not already. Thank you to our wonderful community. Thank you, Simone.
My pleasure. Thank you, Selena. And thanks for all the great questions and comments here.
Yeah. And for all of you, go forth and disrupt it. I
Thanks.
hope all of you stay
Yeah.
healthy, stay well, and lead on. Thanks again.